Whispering Woods is opening its doors to more and more animals. Genevieve Joyce is excited to welcome new South American species and expand the haven's educational reach. Meanwhile, Sylvester Kane is pushing Silvacorp's presence further and further into South America, and Jimena Alvarez and her various rescue groups are beginning to struggle. With pressure to evacuate all of the animals safely rising, Arthur Joyce volunteers to travel to South America to aid the efforts. And as with the wallaby rescues a few months ago, Anna Kingston offers to go with him. On the home front, things are going more or less smoothly. With Wesley Parsons taking point on the South American dome, Imogen Chen is left with plenty of time to make sure the rest of the animals in the zoo are well taken care of. The head keeper also takes Simon Joyce under his wing, and the rookie is proving to be a valuable asset to the haven. Charlotte Baker is elbows deep in the zoo's finances and looking forward to the day the accountant is able to return. Until that is, Genevieve receives a sad bit of news. Jonathan Vaughn is sick. Very, very sick. Welcome back to Whispering Woods Wildlife Haven. Hey everyone, Sparrow here. Thank you for once again joining me at Whispering Woods, or if it's your first time, thank you for joining. My voice might sound a little bit weird today. I happen to have a cold. Like, who has a cold at the beginning of May? Me, apparently. So please do bear with me, but I did want to get this video out because today we are building for the bush dogs. They will be on the other side of the entrance pathway into the South America Dome. For this enclosure, I used two big inspirations, well, technically three, but two real life inspirations. So these walls that I'm building initially were inspired by the bush dog enclosure at Twycross. They have these sort of dry stone looking walls with glass viewing area, and then on either side these slightly taller walls. So I thought that looked pretty good. Obviously I'm changing it around to fit my own style, and we are going to make this a wider viewing area. We'll have these in a few different sections of this enclosure. I believe I end up making one larger viewing area and then another only two glass panel one on the other side. The other real life inspiration comes from Colchester Zoo, where they have sort of these raised viewing platforms above the bush dog pools that people can stand on to view the bush dogs better. But that will be coming a little bit later. Our third inspiration is ZSH Plays, who I watch religiously. Best part of my Saturday morning. Always grab a coffee and just sit down and watch his videos. So highly recommend if you haven't seen any of his work, but I'm sure you probably have. So these rock walls are somewhat inspired by his South America Dome. He put together a blueprint of rock walls that he uses in Belmont Zoo, and I thought I would try my hand at making my own faux rock walls. So here I'm using a blueprint, which you can find linked in the description below, of the faux rocks recolored to the temperate and taiga biomes. So we have the more greenish ones as the temperate, and then the taiga are the more gray ones. So I wanted a little bit of that two-tone effect with the rocks so that they didn't look all the same. And then once I'm happy with both sides, so I'm making sure that both sides look pretty decent, I'm going to sink in some of these pebbles to help ground the wall to the ground. And then we'll be adding some foliage to it. Going to be plenty of South American plants, seeing as the bush dogs only tolerate South American and Central American plants, but they do tolerate anything from tropical to grassland and also aquatic plants, so that helps us out a little bit. Not going to go too crazy with the plants. I'm putting in some Buddleia to make it look like there's something peeking through the cracks. We're also going to put in some Cibola bushes, and we will have some vines, or roots rather, the strangler fig roots. Plenty of leaf litter at the bottom. This will also help to ground the rock walls, as well as some Spanish hanging moss, which I totally forgot about. I have never used this plant because I've never built in South America, and I usually try to keep the foliage somewhat relevant to the biome and continent it comes from. So those will help to fill up some of those gaps in the rocks. And I'm just making sure that both sides are looking pretty decent so that we have a bit more to play with, and it doesn't look like the walls are repeating so much. Because this way I'll be able to rotate them and both sides will look fine. So once I'm happy with those, I'm going to slide them into place. Quite a lot of this enclosure is going to be these rock walls because I find that they help minimize the sight lines, but also they provide a very nice South American backdrop for the bush dogs, which is what I was aiming for with this enclosure. Here I'm putting up a wall in between, you can see that blue boundary line. So initially I was going to make 2 bush dog yards, but somehow my calculations are always off whenever I try to do stuff like this. So they will have access to both sides of the enclosure, but it means that they have a little bit more room, which means that we can have more of them in here. Just making sure that it doesn't look too repetitive. Some of the rock walls didn't meet up super nicely, so I'm filling in those cracks there. And that's basically our backdrop for the bush dogs. Here is that secondary viewing area into the second yard. This will be along a path that leads into the back of the tropical dome. So we will be back to dress up this area a little bit more once we start filling out the South America dome and getting towards that back section, which is where a lot of our South American cats will be residing. Changing up those rock walls from before to create a little hill in front of this viewing area, again to decrease the sight line across this yard, as well as give the bush dogs a slightly raised place to go to. They will be able to traverse this with a little bit of wiggling the rocks around. Just topping that off with some fun tropical foliage, and then it's time to build these guys some pools. The amount of time I spent trying to figure this out was quite high. At first I wanted to build it without using a mud column, but this time, if you watched last week's video, I did need to use a mud column. So let's head over to that. So my mud column goes in the middle, and because it is a grid piece, it is always going to snap to itself. I am using concrete panels, so this has the position snap turned on, which is why it's snapping to the end of the previous panel. And I'm just building that out. It's about 8 meters out of the center with this slanted panel to allow the bush dogs to enter the pool, and then a little bit of a curved edge to help blend it into the soil. Since I have one side done, I can now rotate this and snap it to that mud column and make sure that you're getting rid of the multiple mud columns in the middle. Otherwise, it's going to get really annoying deleting them afterwards. And then once I click out of the group, so that's the important part, you can use the advanced movement tool to rotate around that central mud column and get everything perfectly in place, just like that. I did keep one of the mud columns in the center just in case I needed to move something around, but that is basically how you use the mud column trick to create circles. And as you can see, I did get my water in finally, and I'm just adjusting those rock walls to make sure that they make sense with the water level and we don't have any floating leaves by accident. So this did take quite a bit of chunk of time, but I think it helps to make it look more realistic. So I'm totally okay sinking that time into something like that. Here the pool is going to be slightly elongated, mostly because I want it to meet up with that viewing area that you see the wood path there. So I'm just extending the concrete to make it a slightly longer elliptical shape. And then we're going to do the same thing on this side, fill it up with water, and make sure that we don't have floating leaves, floating rocks, and everything is looking perfect. Since we are working with water and paths once more, we do need to make sure that we are doing things in a certain order. So right now the path, it doesn't have enough room to connect, which means that I'm figuring out how much land exactly I need underneath here to make this work the way I want it to. And then I'm going to use the stamp tool to create a more refined edge. So this is a very, very good trick if you have never used the stamp tools. Then I'm going to get my water in first, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to. And then I can get my path in. So now we can see the path snapping correctly into the sections I want it to. Next, we've got some planting. So bush dogs, as the name suggests, do like to spend quite a bit of time in the undergrowth. So I'm placing some giant rhubarb plants around these probably wouldn't do too well in the British weather, but for the purposes of challenge mode, we are going to place some in. These tree ferns are marked as temperate, and they would actually survive outdoors in the UK, which is really nice. And finally, just some dead trees. There's really not that many South American trees that would survive in the UK, so we're just not going to worry about that too much and dress it up with other things like fallen logs and low-growing bushes and stuff like that. Logs and pebbles, of course, are probably the best way to dress up an otherwise barren enclosure. Not that this one is barren, obviously it has a lot of foliage, but if you're working on something like a desert enclosure, then yes, faux rocks and fallen trees are a must. In enclosures like this one, they are definitely a plus. Now we can see I've got 2 bush dogs in here. They have plenty of space and they can get through that gate at the back. Here we're just going to make sure that they can get up this rocky outcrop, and there we go. And we have our final build for today's episode. This is the raised viewing area inspired by Colchester Zoo. So I'm sort of copying that railing using the Planet Zoo planks, the painted ones. I don't think I've used these in a very long time. They are a base game piece, but they fit the vibe. And I'm just going to plant up this section in between, mostly so that guests can feel immersed in this more tropical foliage that we see inside of the enclosure, and also to block off the sightline into the bush dog enclosure. So you do have to go up onto this raised viewing platform in order to actually see them. To protect our guests from the sun or the rain, more likely, we are going to create a roof. This one is using the Oceanian thatch awning. Just making sure that's tall enough for people to fit under. Not a super big viewing area, but it is pretty reminiscent of the one in Colchester, I want to say, because that one does also have the thatch roofs and these support beams. These ones I'm actually using the Zookeeper maple. They're a little bit more metally than I wanted them to be, but I think the color worked out quite well. Making sure that's nice and secured to the pathway. You can maybe spot a bush dog in the water just past this. I remember they were swimming around while I was working on this part. And then we'll make sure that our guests are well educated about the bush dog. So I'm sinking the education board under the walkway, and then our TV screens are the ones with the actual educational signage on them. Here we're going to have a small centerpiece in between, again bringing that foliage out into the guest space and then sort of announcing what they're going to be seeing in here with that bush dog sign. We'll clean up this edge in between with some tropical leaf litter just to cover up the straight path edge. And of course, provide our guests with some seating and donation bins so that they can help us with this very important conservation work. As you walk up to the South American Dome, on one side you have the flamingos, and on the other side you have our brand new bush dogs. Currently housing 3 female bush dogs, these girls are busy exploring their new territory, including the foliage, the water, as they are very adept swimmers. Here's a view from our raised viewing area. And they even found the blood scent marker on top of the rocky hill. Their favorite has to be the bubble machine though. They've been playing with this non-stop and they are so cute while doing it. The keepers and vets are doing their absolute best to keep things clean and fresh for them. And entertaining too. Next time we'll be headed into the South America Dome, so I want to hear from you, which animals should we build for first? Until then, remember to leave a like and subscribe and potentially join the nest if you'd like to support me a little bit further. See you next time. Bye.